Mount Cape Palmas, mountain back to Atlantic Ocean, Obomi Hills to Pocondre, to educate, elevate, and promote. Yeah, focus on Liberia, for Liberia, Liberia, for Liberia, yeah. From Monday to Sunday, from Monday to Sunday, it's focus on Liberia. Talk about home affairs, hey, in diaspora, current affairs, hey, reliable information, history, ooh, talking about culture, hey, politics, education, entertainment, hey, business, sports, advertisement, articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. From Monday to Sunday. Focus on.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another session of Focus on Liberia. I'm your co-host here, Gabriel Carter. Today, we're going to be talking about issues around finance, economics, maybe a little bit of politics. Again, wherever you are, thank you for joining us. In the studio with me today, I have the president of Focus on Liberia. He's going to be joining me today. Hopefully, he can help me navigate through these discussions. Today, we want to talk about the recently downgraded credit rating of Afreximbank, meaning this is the Import-Export Bank of Africa. We also want to talk about the recently, which is prospective AU formation of its own credit rating agency. Now, you might be wondering why do we want to talk about it. This has been a major discussion over the last 2-3 years with the AU. Right after COVID, African countries and financial institutions were downgraded faster than their European counterpart, and because of that fast downgrade, there was a pushback from African countries in terms of how these three rating agencies look at the rating system that goes into that. So from that discussion came the talk of forming an African rating agency to counter the three big credit rating agency, which are Fitch, Moody, Standard & Poor, or for short S&P. Right. So we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be looking at the implication of what it means for access to capital for African countries, how they can access capital on the capital market, meaning if you want to raise bonds, go on the Euro bonds and all of that, what it means for you if you do have a credit score. If not, what it also means with the formation of AU, a rating agency. So what that means is the hope that with the formation of this AU rating agency, more African countries can have access to the capital market as opposed to, because the hope is that that rating system will be a lot lenient than what the three rating agency currently does. So this is what we're going to be talking about, and we're going to bring it back to Liberia in terms of, what it means for us. Could this be the opportunity for us to now be able to have a rating score and be able to go on the capital market and raise capital and carry out some development that we need to do. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. So wherever you are for the next hour or so, take your time, get your tea, coffee, or whatever you drink, palm wine, sit down for the next hour, and let's have a discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. I had to come to listen, and I hope we want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe as we talk about the future of raising capital for
Yes,
African banks and companies, and then
yes.
you talk about the downgrade. So even though I know everything, but not everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
let's first talk about the for someone like me,
Mhm.
what does that title mean? The future of raising capital for African banks and companies.
Yeah, so thank you. That is, I think, is a fitting title for what is happening in the global market right now, especially Africa and how the global financial architecture works. So, as I said earlier, recently the Afri Bank, which is the biggest import and export bank on the continent, was downgraded to what we call a triple B negative. So that is one level for it to be considered junk. So if credit rating agency, just as you are in the States or some European country, you have a credit
Mm,
score. Countries have credit score. Uh, Companies have credit score. So Afri Bank was at I think it was at triple A or so, but it was downgraded to triple B negative because of the shift from doing import and export to now doing development projects financing. And
mm,
because of that, one of the big three rating agencies thought this is a risky move. It put you too much exposure, it gives you too much exposure to countries. And because these countries that you're investing in, you're doing project financing in are risky. So we're gonna, downgrade you because of that. So that
mm.
was they were downgraded. Now, what does that mean for
Right. And let's talk about that first.
right?
So first, the group that downgraded uh, uh, Afrisi Bank,
Yeah,
SMP or
it's Fitch, one of the big
Fitch.
threes.
Okay,
Yes,
Fitch. So
yeah,
Fitch did that. And what
yes,
Fitch was looking at is, hey, uh, this is
yep,
what you were doing first. You were doing
yes,
import
exactly.
export, but
Yep,
because you cannot change, it's risky for us.
yep,
It's risky for that business, and so we're going to downgrade you.
absolutely. Yep,
Okay. So when you are downgraded, meaning, and I'm putting it in my shoes.
hmm
My credit rating is now 7. So if they downgrade me 5 or 4, meaning I can't even get a loan to pay for my car.
yes. So perfect. I'm glad you brought that example of perfect example. Let's say your credit score is in a 700 and they get downgraded to 600 or 650 because it was at 700 initially. If you wanted to go buy a car or even buy a house, your interest rate will be low. Why?
Yeah.
Because they see you as having a good history of making payment on time, you're good with your finances. This is why your credit score was high. But now that it's been downgraded because maybe you've missed payment or so or here and there or something you've done that
Yeah.
caused the downgrade. If you go to the same banks or any financial institution to go borrow now, they will see you as a risky uh, consumer, right? They say this guy is risky. So guess what? The interest rate that they're going to give you will be high, right? So
Yeah.
for you, that means you'll be paying more. So that's exactly what it means for African Bank, right? The fact that they have been downgraded, there are investors who invest in these banks that allow African Bank to carry out these projects, financing in these different countries. So these investors will now be looking at African Bank as a risky investment, right? This is why the board of African Bank actually pushed back on this narrative to say, you know, we have been a stable bank. We have been consistent. Matter of fact, you can look at our balance sheets. This shouldn't happen. Now, here's why this is a big backdrop to that.
Mhm.
2, 3 years ago, or 4, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, after the COVID, African banks were downgraded faster than the European banks. Man, African countries were downgraded faster than the European counterpart. And that is because of, again, the risk that many African countries actually have, right? The AU and many African countries push back on this to say the way you are looking at African countries when you're doing your assessment to assess the credit rating of these countries, it's not the same that you it's not how you look at your European counterpart. You know, we have been downgraded faster than you downgraded our European counterpart. So out of that bigger conversation came the opportunity to launch an AU, African continental wide rating agency, meaning Africa want to separate itself from those three
Mhm.
European counter agency to form their own rating agency that's going to rate African countries and companies that raise capital on the market differently, looking at the African context, right? And why did they say that? So one of the biggest discussion point was that
Mm.
when you're assessing these things, you have a model out there that you look at.
Right.
We follow this, we take your template and follow this model in terms of how to get a good credit score. But the final decision isn't made following those decisions. The final decision is made in a deliberation behind closed door for
Mhm.
that to be made, right? And the African countries are not okay with that. Second
Right.
point is that
Mm.
they say most European countries, we have gold, we have natural resources that are in the soil. I think if you're looking at our rating agency, you should be taking account of those natural resources as well, which will actually give us a boost in terms of not only the potential, but the ability to have, if we do have access to those resources, the income potential and that could give us. But you're not looking at that. So what we call the African context. So this is why the European Union and many African countries have been pushing back on this. So prospectively in September,
Gabriel,
the
before you get to
AU,
that point,
right,
because there's so much in there to
right,
unpack. Because as you are explaining this now, I'm beginning to see that everything that goes on in the world is tied to the economy, right?
absolutely, right.
I mean, we politics just on the surface, but the main thing under there is so I'm thinking to myself, but why does Africa expect Europe to give them fair rating? Why?
And it again, it goes back to without trying to get too political, the whole colonial system and how the monetary architecture system was set up. When these three rating agencies were formed, we were still in the back end fighting for liberation, trying to free
Mm,
ourselves from colonialism, right? So we're now coming to understand that, as you rightly pointed out, everything. Every time you see, I always like to say, every time you see people talking about politics or who's this candidate, who's this, what this person, at the fundamental common denominator at the base of that is the economics, meaning
yeah.
which candidate is going to do well for me, right? Economically, to drive this country forward that everybody can benefit. The same thing as these countries were fighting for liberation, their European counterpart were forming the global financial architecture that we, thrive on today, right? But they have now come to the realization that these things are actually negatively skewed towards them. Meaning the
Yeah.
way they look at African country, they don't look at their European counterpart like that. The way they're rated, they're not rating their European counterpart like that. South Africa was the first to take that step. As I said, that conversation, I was fortunate enough to have sat in on that discussion, right? So now it's coming onto the continental wide where African country. Now, to be honest with you, from a competitive standpoint, it's going to take decades. I think the way to go about it should be, maybe that's a discussion we will get to, would be
Mhm.
to maybe supplement what the three agencies are doing and actually build a reputation. Then you can now compete. But anyway, that's what this discussion
Mm.
is about, right?
Right. So now they're thinking, okay, like even uh say IQ test,
Right.
all these things, all these ways of doing things, they are testing because I believe before they could do it, they carried out experiment, and those experiments did not include Africa. Those pilots did not include Africa. So the factors they are looking at, they are, I would say, Eurocentric, or they are
Eurocentric,
skewed towards
absolutely.
the West,
Yeah.
right? So why is it that we are expecting anything better?
And
Why
and
do we
and
want to play in a league? I mean, the people, in a life story, it's just that crab turtle called spider to first spider invited turtle for dinner,
yeah,
and they say the dinner will be held on top of the water,
yeah,
and turtle is not able to swim to float.
yeah.
So as soon as turtle got there, turtle went on the ground, and
Underwater.
spider
Yeah,
alone ate the food.
yeah.
Okay, so Toro say, okay, I get what to do. So Toro to organize dinner and say it will be under the water.
Yeah,
So what's part of this? Part of wore a suit, a coat, and put rag in the pocket. So Toro father was able to go underground. So Toro said, what? The guy want stay in my food. So what
yeah.
Toro said, well, in the civilized world, anytime we eating, we're supposed to take out our jacket. Soon Sparrow took out a jacket, he was back.
It's
So
was
the
back up.
Europeans and the Western people, they are inviting us to dinner on top of the water, knowing very well that we can't swim, we can't
Yeah,
float.
yeah,
So
yeah.
for why? I mean, it bothers my mind. So why we really think that it's going to be fair?
Now, and to give it the what I call generational context, meaning these are not things our grandparents or parents were accustomed to. This is not the kind of financial system they were in. They just functioned. They just fought for liberation, and they
Mm,
existed in a whatever the European were doing. They just functioned in it. They never really understand the financial architecture of how everything works. Right? There's a new generation of African that are emerging, meaning we have seen how stagnant these countries have been, African countries
mm,
specifically. And we have seen how our parents, our grandparents have managed the affairs of our state. But we also now see what drives the affairs of our states, right?
yeah,
So we see the differences, right? And this is why we are now saying, okay, if we understand exactly how the financial global architecture work, we're going to challenge it because we know it doesn't play into our favor. We know the rules
yeah,
that were laid out way before some of us came to be, became aware of it. So now that we understand the rules of how the global architecture, financial architecture work, we want to change it. If you can't allow us to change it, guess what? We will create our own rules here so we can play in our own league. And if you do decide to come, you know, play in our own league, you're going to follow our own rules as well. So
yeah.
that's exactly why this conversation is taking place across the
So,
continent.
so Africa doing now what Otoro did. Since you invited me and it was on land, it was on top of the water. I'm inviting you to under the water and see whether you're going to survive.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. So with the downgrade, so Fitch downgraded the African Bank. So with this downgrade now, what really does it mean for African countries, for African banks?
So as I said earlier at the beginning of the introduction, African Bank Finance, it does a lot of import and export financing, right? Um, so this is the probably the biggest bank on the continent that does import and export financing. And if you know,
Explain that import and export financing small for
okay,
people that
so
are
import and
not.
export financing, if you want to go buy something in like for major companies now, right? You have to buy
Mm,
US dollars
right.
because you
You,
know
you want to
everything
buy
works.
let's say you want to buy 10 yellow machines.
10 yellow machine, you can't use
Mm,
Liberian dollar to buy it, or you can't
right.
use the Kenyan shilling to do it, right? So you have to change that money into the US dollars to do it, right?
Right.
So they facilitate a lot of that transaction, right? On a bigger
Okay.
level, right? So let's say perfect yellow machine, if we want to go do yellow machine, if we didn't have the supposedly $80 million that price tag that was placed on it in
Mm,
US dollar at our central bank, but we had it in Liberian dollar, we could have gone to them and exchange, do the exchange rate, and then go to China or USA to buy that. So that's their biggest play. But they
okay.
transition to doing project and financing, right? So what does the downgrade mean? So with this downgrade, meaning this bank itself, African Bank, has investors, right? People invest in it for it to carry out those transactions, including the project financing. With this downgrade, what it means is that investors will now be demanding more for their money because they now view this bank as risky, right? And if you are being deemed very risky, that means the interest you will be paying on those loans will be very high, right? Now, if you are paying too high interest on your loan, right? Meaning that is a lot of money coming from your bottom line to be able to carry out more investment projects. So this is why this is very important. That means some of the projects that they will be looking at in different African countries will be limited. It will affect how much length of or the type of investment they can do, which will actually limit their exposure to investment in a different African country. So this is why this is very important for not just the Afrexim Bank, but other African country in the region as well. Yeah,
Hmm. So now with the downgrade, that's on the investor side.
right.
So if I'm Liberia, I want to buy my 250 yellow machines, and the 80 million or 90 million for those machines, I go to a Frisian bank. How is that going to affect me now since they've been downgraded?
So here's the thing. So you can't, let's say if you do have the what I call that 80 million in Liberian dollar, right?
Right.
If you want to go, change it in the what do you call US dollar at the Afrexim Bank, the rate that they're going to give you is going to be very, very, very low, right? Because they themselves need to make money. It's an investment bank. Is that
Yeah.
even though it does all these exchanges, they did is an investment bank as well, right? So this is why this is very impactful, not just for the bank itself, but other African country as well. Right.
So for that the 80 million I have, maybe before that the
It
80 million
was
Liberian dollar I have, maybe before it used to be 10 million
right.
US dollars. So now it's going to be maybe 3 million.
It could be lower. Right.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right. Now,
Exactly.
now I get it. So
Right.
it's going to affect us.
Right.
All right. Now I get it. So, uh, and I know you alluded to this first that
Right.
these rating agency they look at it when they are rating Europe is different
Mhm.
than when it comes to Africa.
Yes.
I
So
want us to touch on that a little bit.
yeah, so the before Africa even thought about or AU, the African Union even thought about forming its own rating agency, there was, as I said, there was always that conversation about how, matter of fact, let me put this out there, and this is known information. Those three rating agencies, none of them have offices on the continent. All of them are based in the West, right? So imagine you don't have an office on a continent of 1.4 billion people, right, with 54 countries, but yet you're rating their countries, right? So when they're getting ready to go raid, what they do, they will send agents to the country, right? And say, these are the things you need to look at. Look at this. Look at what Dennis is doing in Liberia, how Dennis governance structure works, how the rule of law, look at the revenues and all of these template that they have out there. And based on
Mm,
that, we can take that template and come back and give Dennis a rating score. Even if you had a preferred score based on the template that they gave you, that decision isn't made based on that score. It come back, it goes to a board that works outdoor,
mm,
right? That board that works not outdoor, but that a board that works behind the scene
mm.
to make that determination, right? So even
And
before
who's
this,
on that board?
this is all the investors, right? The board of
Mm,
directors. These are all the investors that are within the.
mm,
So for
mm.
each agency has its own board of directors, right? So in that
And you may not have Africans there to talk for us.
you cannot, right? So whatever score they put out, you just have to accept it, right?
Hmm. So because of this, now they say, well, this is not fair to us. So let's come up with our own rating agency.
Correct, right? So let me expand on this as well.
Mm,
So based on this, that how they were looking at African, as I said, rating agency, when the AU decided to, so let me talk about how rating is done, maybe a little bit extensively. So
okay.
there's in addition to the board, those rating agencies do have what we call investors, right? So they're there to make money, right? Um, you buy, so if you want to get a rating score, you buy that, right? If you want to get rated, you buy. So this is how they make money, right? So they knew that this was all about money, right? So African countries are saying We
No,
just
no.
want,
Can you say that again? You say you buy the rating when you want to
yes.
get rated.
So if you get rating, if you want to get rated, you buy. You have to
So
buy.
so
You have
let,
to buy
let
that
put it
score.
for me. What we started by saying my credit score used to be 700, now it's
Yeah,
500.
right.
So so how do I
If
buy rating?
if you from the consumer side is different, and this is
Okay.
why there's a what we think there's a conflict of interest, right? So
Mhm.
from the consumer side, all they have to look at is your payment history, the amount of debt
Yeah.
you carry compared to your income, the length of time, um, and I think there's those three major categories determine your credit score, right? Yeah, on-time payment, the length of time you've had, uh, you know, loans, and
Yeah.
also your debt to income, meaning how much debt you carry compared to your income. On a
Correct.
rate, on the company
The
side, on
investor.
those
Mhm.
investment side, right? It's different. Meaning, if you want to get rated as a country, you have to pay for that, right?
Hmm.
And for those who come to say, okay, I've rated Liberia is rated, I want to go invest in Liberia, but I want to have access to Liberia rating score. You have to pay to get access to that, right? So if I want to go invest in Liberia and I know Liberia has a rating score, as an investor, I will pay to get to that score, right? So that's how those agencies make money. So
Mhm.
this is the what we
So,
call,
so if
and there's
if
a
I if I has Labro one rating and I pay, is
right.
that legal?
That is the
Is it
biggest
is it not pay to play?
exactly. That is the biggest pushback, and I think it's a legitimate pushback that these African countries are having, a discussion they're having. And it's new out there. This is why, matter of fact, what led us into the big financial crash, right? You pay,
Mm.
you get your security rated, and then you put it on the market, say this is rated by Moody, Fitch, and Standard and Poor, even though you pay to get that rated, to get that score that you got rated. So this is
Mm.
happening across country as well. So the advantage that African countries are pitching is that we want a fair rating system where we don't have to pay, right?
Right.
And that if you're going against a monopoly of not just one but big three, that is a big fight to go put up. Even though I think it's a fight that is worth putting up, but it's a big fight to put up. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, how you know how is that fair?
We don't talk about these things. This is like never, as we always said, things are never as they seem, right?
Mhm.
Nothing is ever as it seems. And this for us, when you are on the outside looking at it, you would think, man, this is fair. This is how we should be looking at things. But when you look at one, how they determine the score, two, that in order to get that score that you want, you have to pay for it. Three, and that in order for other investors to access that score, they have to pay for it,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
exactly how they make money. You realize this is all about a big, it's all about money and all is driven by that. And if you're making it to be driven by money, then be fair to everybody. Don't treat
yeah.
others negatively as compared to the their counterparts. Right.
Hmm. So my next question is so AU say we're gonna launch our own rating
Right.
agency. How will they first? Let's talk about how you go about that.
So it's already in a work. Matter of fact, it's due to be launched in September of this year. And with
Mhm.
everything that AU does, sometimes you want to scratch your head when you think about it, because there was also the prospective ECHO, which was supposed to be the West African single currency, which we are still waiting for.
Mhm.
So the fact that they're saying that they're having a rating agency um, that is due to be launched in September, we I think this is a big fight that I hope they can pull this off, right? But here's the thing: going against an established, not just one monopoly but three, is going to be tough, right? Now, here's what they're pitching. Here's what how they decide to go about it. China has tried this, so the African Union is not the first country. I mean, it's not the first entity or country that have tried to do this. China have tried it and they have failed. Um, what they end up doing, they end up bringing in those three rating agency to do their rating for them, right? In addition to them doing that side by side with the three rating agency. So others are saying this is how the AU should go about it. Don't compete at the beginning, but
Mhm.
collaborate so you understand their model. then eventually you can go on your own.
And branch out.
Once you get that credibility that okay, they do exactly what the big three does, the Fitch, Moody's, Standard and Poor does, and they look at the same metrics and they have the same skill set to do that, then you can move on your own. But to now just do what we call from a kamikaze style out of frustration to say, oh, you're not doing things the way I want you to do, so I'm just going to form my own. There's the credibility piece that comes with it. People may
Yeah.
not trust it, and if you don't gain that trust from the beginning, you can end up losing the credibility for other African countries to trust it. Here's the other point here. If you now establish an AU rating agency, right? All the economy across Africa are not the same. Kenya has a big economy in South Africa, Nigeria. If you rate them, they could challenge that rating and say, we have a big economy. Why are you rating out this way? Again, the question becomes, how do you navigate those challenges? And this is why others are saying that they should model themselves after the big three and then eventually gain that credibility before going on their own as well, because there's going to be a lot of influences and pushback from different countries as well. The question becomes whether the AU has given their decision, what they have made, this how they made decision across many economic challenge, things across the continent, or political with the Sahel state moving away and they haven't said anything. People are doubting their leadership to be able to have the kind of influence to carry out these things. But I personally think that this is way overdue. However, they should go about it taking their time without rushing to it, because this is something that we think should have been done a long time ago. Yeah,
In other words, say you got to crawl before you walk.
exactly. Yeah,
They want to walk right away.
yeah.
Yeah. But at the moment, do we have our own rating system in these countries?
No, we do
Like,
not.
oh, we don't have anything. So
We
let's
don't.
say
Yeah, go ahead.
so how, and I'm using my US because I think I visited a bank once when I was in high school. So so I'm using my US banking ideas. So if people want credit, how do you determine what do they look at? And then with
Right.
if companies want to get loans, what do we use in Africa?
And this is a two-part question. So let's look at it from the consumer side, and then we'll look at it from the company and then countries side as well. So
Okay.
across Africa right now, if you want to go borrow from either a bank or any financial institution, there is no way for people, or let me say, there's a limited way for me to be able to assess whether Dennis will be able to pay back this money that he wants to borrow, right?
Yeah.
This is why the lending, the ability for companies or banks to take risk on people is limited, because I don't know whether Dennis is going to pay back. So this is why it's heavily relationship based, right? Meaning, because I only know I lend to Dennis because I know Dennis. I don't lend to Dennis because Dennis, I have Dennis credit score. I know Dennis payment history and all of that. This is prevalent across not just Liberia but across Africa as a whole. So that's from the consumer side. The same thing is true on the the countrywide side, right? If the country wants to get credit rating, they have to go to Moody's, right, to get rated. Many countries on the continent do not have a credit rating score, right? So if they want to go borrow, some of them, this is why we're stuck with the IMF and World Bank, because we don't
Mhm.
have any other way to go borrow on the capital market. So the only way we can get money to go do our investments, we run to the AU and the IMF and the World Bank, right? Because we don't have a rating agency. Here's the laziness on our part as well. The point is that the thing here is that we fail to be able to say, okay, even though we're stuck in this predicament where we don't have a rating agency, let's go to this rating agency. They have a template. Every rating agency has a template out there. Take that
Mm.
template, follow everything they have on the template, and present it to them. Say, we want to get rated as well. And they're going to tell you, okay, this and this and this and this and that. This is what you need to do, even though you have to pay for it. If it even is going to take you maybe 3 to 4 years to do that, do that and be able to come up with a rating score so you can have more access to the rest of the capital market as opposed to just being stuck with the IMF. This is why the IMF is taking advantage of these debt trap countries that have no rating agent, I mean no rating score as well. Hopefully, I don't know if I answered that question.
No, you answer, and you
Right.
went into this a little bit,
Right.
that so if we have our own, how how do we
Yeah.
gain access to these larger capital markets?
Yeah. So if we do have our own rating agency,
Can
or
they
if
trust
we
us?
if we do have our, there's two things, right? If we do have our own rating agency, um, now it's going to take time for, you know, maybe investors outside of the country, outside of the continent to trust us to say, I don't really trust whether African AU rating agency can really assess the risk that are in this country, right? But however, intercontinental wise, right, it's going to give us the ability for us to invest in each other because we now have something we can look at. You know, I know
Yeah.
how Dennis governs. I know how the rule of law is in Dennis country. I know how, how much, diamond or gold or natural resources Dennis has that are untapped. That if he has the capital, he can have access to and bring those, you know, and leverage the resources, right? Which is the African context. The other aspect here, the other aspect here is that if we do, it opens up, even though that trust is going to take a long time, it opens up investment from outside as well, right? Even though it's going to take a long time, but eventually, what we call foreign direct investment, or people that want to invest in this country to want to come out, they can come into whatever African country to invest in. In addition to that, we, again, as I said this before, we don't have to rely on the IMF anymore. Let's say, perfect example, the aid agenda have a price tag of $8 billion that they want to carry out over 5 years. They can just say, you know what, we're going to take the Liberian credit score, we go to the capital market and raise bonds. We're raising the $9 billion bond to carry out all these agenda. They don't have to go to the IMF. Right now it's put on the shelf because there is no money to fund it. If we had a credit rating, we could have gone to Eurobond, or leverage the rest of the capital markets that are out there, supernatural capital uh, lending partners, to be able to raise that money to do that. But because we don't, and we are not the only country, we're stuck in this predicament right now. Right.
And Gabriel, see how all these things are connected, right? When I was in Ghana, we were doing as a refugee, we were in an agriculture school that we had on the camp. So we used to visit some of their companies. So we went on a very large planting farm, and they
Hmm.
were exporting. And we were told, hey, we don't have, and this is true about most of our African countries, that we don't even have enough to sell to the larger world market. So Gabriel will buy from Liberia, buy from Ivory Coast, buy from Sierra Leone,
Hmm.
put it together, and then he will sell. So in other words, there's a middle person,
There
because
is no.
we don't have, they tell us that we
Yeah.
don't have enough to sell.
Yeah.
But this one guy is, so now he's going to buy the thing from all 10 cents and then sell it 50 cents.
Yeah.
So this is just the way, most of these things, we are treated.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
we're
don't.
okay with it.
It's, we have been okay with it for a long time, but I think with the advancement of the rest of the world, and many African countries are seeing that they're being left behind. But not only that, but they're seeing that you can scream politics here, this person, this, and you cannot advance without having money. I tell
Yeah.
people that you can't go anywhere without having money or access to it, right? We can scream politics, we scream, we beat our head against a rock. There is rules that was established way before, and those rules are set in place. They are archaic, they have
Mhm.
been tested, tried and true, right? And in order, you either break through them, or you can try to circumvent them, right? If we can break through them, we can create a parallel structure that compete with it, right? Model it, and compete with it directly as well. Right.
And Gabriel, you talk about, now when they look at us, because what we're trying to do is say, hey, look at us. We have diamond, we have iron, we got all these things under the ground,
Right.
right? But the fact that we don't have control, like say Liberia talking about iron ore, but then the iron ore is not in your hand. Somebody have to come and do it. So how do you this concept now of credit rating and what we're supposed to be doing? How do you kind of uh, juxtapose that with the activities of these big concession companies coming to Africa to do so? It takes these resources out of our hands. So what are we saying?
Right. So, thank you. That is a great, so great piece there, right? Meaning, because we're limited, we don't have access to raising
Mm,
money on the capital market, and we do need money to carry out developmental activities in the country, right?
yeah.
If you, as an investor, now come into the country who wants to invest in Liberia, you see that, and you know that there is a deposit of iron ore here or gold, because you know Liberia desperately needs the money, you're going to take advantage of them. And because
Mm,
they don't have access to get any other way, they can go to the IMF, they can go to the World Bank. The World Bank only give them change, pocket change, right? So you know they're cash strapped, and they urgently need the money. So you're going to play on that information to take advantage and leverage it and to your advantage to be able to take that deposit or whatever natural resources they have at a fraction of what they could have gotten for it had they had uh,
mm,
the ability to raise capital and say, you know what, perfect. Zambia. Zambia was in debt for the longest, and there's also a trap here too. When you have debt on your hand, there's also a trap. You can continue to be, you know, paying interest on that debt, or you can also do one thing. If it's too heavy, you can default, right?
mm,
But when you default as an African country, it takes longer for you to get to that, to come back, to clean up your score and come back on the capital market, right? Zambia, it took Zambia that much time to do that, right? 4 years. So Zambia said we don't want to take that much time anymore to do that, right? So they're big. They're one of the biggest proponent of this AU rating agency, and this is why many African countries, you know, not just African countries as a whole, but many African in the diaspora as well, cherry on this AU agency, that they want to see it formulated, they want to see it launch. I don't care even if it means that we bring two other African countries clean up that can get capital. That's an advancement. It takes time. In gradation, we're going to incremental improvement. We're going to get to a place where we can really have a system that everybody trusts around the world as well.
mm. But Gabriel, also look at we like we don't if at the moment we're not even selling to each other, right? I
Mhm.
mean, a lot. We're not. It's like we are trading with Europe, America, and other places, and not. So if we're not already doing those little things, how can we come to a point and say, okay, we're going to have our own credit rating, we're going to have our own currency, we're going to do X, Y, Z? So many barriers. I was reading somewhere, what is it? We can't even communicate with one another. So if we have different area country codes. So a phone from Liberia to Ghana or from Liberia to Africa has got to go through Europe before it come. I mean, it's like there's barrier everywhere. How have
Yeah.
we
So
managed to even survive?
there are the challenges across the Africa it's plentiful, right? There are a lot. There's the after with the free African trading agreement, which itself is lacking the ability to very much decentralized trade across the continent, meaning that would allow African us as to travel across.
Yeah.
uh, border easily without being
Right. You
harassed,
in
right?
Europe, you can do that
You
in one
can
day
do
and
that
travel to.
easily. You can get
Yeah.
on a train in France and go to England and everywhere else you want to go, just around, and easy air travel, even by road. It's not the same across Africa. To move from one
Mm,
country to another, you get stopped at the border and do this. You carrying good, it will shake you down, and so there are challenges, right? So the fact that we're saying that this is, you know, there aren't challenges. There are a lot, including the AU supposedly uh, credit rating agency. So if you look across the continent, there's a lot of challenges. But amidst those challenges, we cannot say there are too many challenges, so we're just going to fold our hands
mm,
and not act, right? We can tackle everything at the same time in smaller steps, right? And this is why I think this is happening. There is the phone, like the thing you brought out was the communication, right? Somebody's going to take advantage of that. Somebody's going to realize that if you have a Liberian phone, there's not, you shouldn't have challenge calling to Ghana or Togo or Nigeria and having roadblock where the call is intercepted, right? Somebody's going to think of that, right? But I think we have to look at this as what I call improvement, or in a sense that we were not, accustomed to these things. Our parents, our grandparents did not look at these things from that lens. This is a new generation of African that are looking at everything across the board. We're looking at the rest of the world and we're comparing ourselves to the rest of the world. And we're looking at these challenges and we say, okay, one at a time, these challenges, if we need to advance either as a country or as a continent, we have to tackle them one at a time, including the free African trade agreement, including the, like you said, the call, including the rating agency, including how to not circumvent the global financial architecture, but how to play either to the rule or even invent our own rule to which we can play to as well. And at the end of the day, the common denominator here, which I always say, is the betterment of each African. Whether it is you come here,
mm,
you talk politics, you don't talk politics, everybody wants to make sure few things. One, you have the ability to survive, to self-actualize, to take care of your family, and to live the life that you want to live. That is all African or every human being look for, right? Now,
mm,
the inhibiting of that, of those things that are in a way that are, prohibiting or become obstacle for every African country to do that, whether it's the politics, sensationalism, tribalism, or whatever it is that we have in this country. We put those aside and look at the economics that drive those to be able to move those forward. Yeah.
mm. And now I'm beginning to think about slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism in economic terms. Because these were not, I would say, like slavery was for economic reason, right? So that you could build and sell and all that. So all these things underneath all these things, this evil is the economy. They want to gain leverage
It's a
and,
eh,
and
yeah.
control over us. And it has worked big time.
It has, and it continues to work, even though we deny it, we don't look at it, or even though the way in which it's being done, it's not the same anymore. So sometimes to be able to identify it is very tough to say, is this really imperialism? Is this really colonialism, or is this really a system that is designed to keep us down or not? So sometimes it's very hard to pinpoint, right? But yes, I do agree with you. These are structure that were put in place. But what I do believe and what I've seen is that there is a shift that is happening. Then is whether we're seeing as we are talking about those shift in Liberia or not, there is a shift that is happening across, not just across the continent, but across the world. But most importantly, across the global south. That all the system that we have abide by, that we have, that was set up, the way they told us to look at that, to look at our economy and all of these things were just meant to keep us exactly where we are, right?
Mhm.
And there's a way awakening across the global south to challenge some of those systems, right? So yes, absolutely, I do agree with you.
And Gabriel, I'm looking at it, and I will bring in as much, maybe you people will call it politics as possible. If let me give my own example, because everything we are doing, we are playing in their league. They are
Right.
dictating and determining everything. They all these things we learn it in their language. Another, I think it was Lumumba who was saying that in Spain they do the education everything in Spanish.
Yeah.
In China do everything agriculture, medicine, everything is in
In
Chinese. It's
Chinese.
only in
Yeah.
Africa that we do it
Do it
in
English.
their language on their terms, the
Yeah.
way they want it done. So how can we be better, or how can we even compete? I'll give you an example. If you went to Dodwakan, right,
Mm.
where you meet me, as a grown man, I'm 40 years old in Dodwakan, you come there, in order to compete with me, you first have to learn dribble. You have
Mhm.
to learn how to navigate to set, even just to set trap, because you don't first start setting, you start with a rat trap, you set trap for rats. After that, you upgrade for squirrel,
Yeah.
and then you go up to, so by the time you start setting trap for things like
The
the pig,
deer, the
the deer,
porcupine.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's an advanced stage.
Yeah.
So do you think you're going to ever catch up with me? You're not,
No. No.
because everything that, even when we leave Dodogan, we're going to Bakukan. You can, I can, any part of that town, any area I go, I can connect and go there.
Mhm.
Whereby you want to use GPS, right?
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is, if everything is on their turf, are we ever going to catch up? Are we ever going to compete? Are we ever going to make it? I am not trying to preach a doomsday here,
Yeah.
but this is a tough battle.
Yeah. So it's a tough battle, but I
Can
think
we do our own thing in essence? That's what I want to say.
we can. And when I say we can, this is what I mean. So I know people might have different reservation with what is happening in the Sahel states with, or not just the Sahel state, Ghana as well, where they have expelled all illegal miners and foreign miners and established, just like that, they have established a gold board through which if you are an outside investor, you want to go buy gold, you have to go through that board. So that means all the revenue that used to be going through these illicit miner are now going through the gold board because there is no more foreigners doing gold mining in our country, right? So what that meant, that change or that shift in policy meant is that it now put money directly 2.3 billion in the Ghana economy, just like that. It has shifted Ghana currency to become the strongest currency in the world right now as we speak, right? And this is all in a matter of a year. Last year, the exchange rate with $1 with CD was $1 with to I think 50 CDs, right? Now is 10 CDs to $1. So in a matter of 12 months, right? And this is our policy shift. What I mean by that is
What?
that, yeah,
It's not 10 cities to $1.
now it's 10 CDs to $1. Yes, yes,
Oh
yeah.
my God.
So Ghana is currency, the CD is the strongest currency in the world right now as we speak. Now, what
Say that again, Gabriel.
is the strongest performing currency in the world, not just in Africa, but in the world? The cities, right? That's how much growth it has had, right? Now, what the government did, as I said, they shut out all the foreign miners. These people used to come in and mine gold and take it out through uh, different means, through vehicles, through air plane, without checking, without checking through without the Ghanaian authority getting their fair share of that. But because that was shut up, where everything now has a centralized place controlled by the government, that is $2.3 billion directly in the Ghanaian economy, right? They were able to now say we're going to pay down our debt. I think they paid down, I think about 600 million or so of their debt, right? But what that shift does is that the system as it was, where people would, oh, you need investors, you need people to come in your country to invest
Mhm.
and do where we bought into, instead of the government saying we're going to take control of this, it has now shifted the country in a different landscape, right? We, when I mean we, Liberia can do the same thing. Burkina
Yeah.
Faso did the same thing, right? Burkina Faso did the same thing. The Sahel states are doing the same thing, right? Meaning this whole one of the books that I think you guys should read is called The War for Sale, right?
Mm.
Where they talk about how some of these natural resources used to be taken uh, in war-torn country. You'll be fighting war in your country. There's a plane coming into your country, landing in the middle of it, taking out natural resources. It's still in Congo right now, right? This is how the war works, right? But when I talk about the shift that is happening right now that you see in Ghana, the Sahel states, are small, even though they are smaller steps, but these are smaller steps that we can look to and say, okay, we can take a playbook from this and see how that can benefit us as well. It's not going to shift the global financial architecture overnight, but it can shift your 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 financial architecture for a country, for maybe like it did for Ghana for 12 months or so, and continue that in perpetuity also, right? Which now gives you a bigger advantage if you want to go additional 2.3 billion. What do you think that's going to do for Ghana? They can go down and pay all their debt, right? They can fund additional resources that they want to. Now, imagine if we are to do the same in Liberia, where we shut down
Mm.
every illegal miner, every foreign miner in our country, and nationalize the gold system, the gold reserves, or the gold mining in our country. What do you think that's going to do? Where we establish a gold board, if anybody is going to do mining in Liberia, they can do mining, but all that gold will be sold to the Liberian board, right? That means we can have our own gold reserve and be able to
Yeah.
sell that gold
Yeah.
on the global market at the price that we think we
That
want
we
to.
set.
If we realize that okay, the price of gold drop, guess what, Dennis? I don't want to sell it. I'll hold on to it until the price go up, then I'll sell it, right? It gives you control. That's what Ghana is doing. That's how South Africa,
So,
Burkina
so
Faso
what
is
will
doing.
it take Labrador to do that? Let's go to Labrador now because I like that Ghana example. I am amazed because I never heard that. I think in Ghana, was it like a thousand city to dollar or something?
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah.
that was a 10,
I
10
was,
city.
yeah, yeah. Now it's 10 cities. Yeah,
So how can Labrador do that? Because maybe the Sahel state is not the best example because
yeah.
it came
It
through
is
cool and
because it
then
has
cool.
that war connotation, right?
Right.
Right, right.
But how can Labrador go about it then?
So it takes. Fortunately, I've met Mahama when he came here to the state in 2016 at my school. He actually spoke at my school. The guy is it takes a bold leadership, right? Meaning you got to be brave, Dennis, right? His predecessor, uh, Akufo, I don't know you call him Ado, right?
Hmm.
This guy
For
was
sure.
the darling of the West who borrowed his to his teeth, right? I think under him the country was were high in debt as well, right? So in order for us to do that, it takes bold leadership, Dennis. And without being too um, speaking down on older people here, I think our country has been ran by old people who have like their idea of how they lead. There is no good point of reference if you look at the history of Liberia. There is no good point of reference to say they can take a playbook from historical context and apply it to the future, right? So everything that they do now is from a place of chaos, or a place of where the predecessor depended on the West and saw the West as the only way out, right? So there is no good point of reference for them to see to say, okay, I can take from this playbook because we had a very good historical point in time where we were displaced or where we were what I call economic sovereignty, not freedom. We have freedom right now, but we don't have economic sovereignty. Where we at this point where we have economic sovereignty, that I can take from that same playbook and apply the same policies here today. We don't have that. We are ran by old folks, and their playbook has just been from a place of chaos. In order for us to do what the likes of Ghana, the Sahel states are doing, we have to have a young and bold leadership. People who are not afraid to shake the table. People who are not afraid of charting their own economic path, regardless of even if the devil himself was sitting in a room with you or who your overlord is. But we don't have that with us. To us, every plaything that we do, we are trying to appease the West, we're trying to appease them to say, make us look at us as if we are, compliant. They're beating us into a compliance. So in order for us to get to where the Ghana is, where Ghana is, where the Sahel states are headed, or even right now, not Burkina, Botswana, the president
Yeah.
of Botswana is deciding on the same thing too as well, right? We have to have bold leadership, right? And for me, I
And,
think that is what will get us there. People are
and
afraid in Liberia, right?
who's supposed to tell? I'm talking Liberia now.
Yeah,
Like for instance, who's supposed to bring about it? Who's supposed to discuss it? The finance minister, the CBL governor? Who's supposed to go to the president and say, "Look, Mr. President, this is what I think we should do." Who? Because all I see is the finance minister, for instance, looking like just a disbursement officer.
yeah.
Who role it is to discuss what you are talking now to say, how can we do this and be like what Ghana did?
Again, it goes back to so three people. One, you pointed out two of them: the Minister of Finance, the central bank governor, and
And
three
I
another body, right? The other body is the president economic advisor team, right? But most importantly, the two that you mentioned, the Minister of Finance and the central bank governor. The Minister of Finance is the fiscal head of the country. The central bank governor is the monetary head of the country, right? So these are people, most importantly, those two. These people are supposed to be looking at where the country is headed, you know, especially the central bank governor to say, okay, how do we grow the economy? What do we need to do, right, to give this country the the edge, or to make this country the place where if you grew up in this country, if you do your best you can survive. If you do your best, you apply yourself, you go to school, you do anything you want to do, that so long that you have the ability to work hard, you can live freely. That's supposed to be coming from the Minister of Finance and the central bank governor, right? They're supposed to be advising the country, the president on those things, right? In terms of having discussion, even if they're not advising the president, those are the things they're supposed to be looking at. But also, if these people have, also there's also the economic advising team, right? Meaning you are advising the president on the entirety of the economy. Where is Liberia, right? Where do we see ourselves in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Where do we want this country to be, right? You got to have target. Do we want to continue to be where we are? Or do we want to say, okay, we're going to set an agenda to push to become a middle income state, right? And in order to do that, how do we leverage the resources that we have? Not the ones that, you know, the things we don't have control over, but the things that we have control over, which are our natural resources, our human capital development. How do we leverage that to get to that? So those three bodies, for me, I believe those are the people that need to be looking at the country in that light and advising the president to take advantage and get us to where we need to get to. Yeah, you're muted.
definitely when we're doing that, people are going to be impacted. You know, the people that are having their free lunch, they're not going to get it anymore. So definitely they're not going to allow us to go that route. So they will keep pushing IMF, USA, World Bank in our faces. If USA is, one of the big things we're cheering for in the country is, hey, USA is no more, but our minister was able to go to the EU.
The EU. Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like from one
For one,
godfather to the other. And these
let,
people, if we are liberated, if we get control of our own natural resources, they're not going to benefit because they're stealing. I was in the war when Firestone was operating under Taylor when bombs were flying.
mm,
So it benefits them when we can't do it and we call them to do it for us.
yeah, and I think you pointed out the minister of finance is supposed to be thinking outside the box. Like you say, he's just like a glorified budget dispenser. Like you the fiscal house of the country. You're not just supposed to be, you know, preparing budget and giving budget at the end of the year. You're supposed to be looking at the country. Okay, there's the Liberian Revenue Authority, which
Mm.
generates the entirety of the revenue we get in the country. You should be having discussion with that entity, meaning how do we expand our tax base? How do we expand our
Exactly.
revenue base, right? And coming up with policy in conjunction with them to be able to do that. You go, you sit with the minister of, the central bank governor. Okay, how do we increase employment in this country? How do we grow the private sector in this country so that every librarian that is coming, we graduate thousands of kids every year out of colleges and different colleges and technical schools and no jobs in our country. It's supposed to be sitting with the central bank governor. Okay, how do we make this country competitive, right? What kind of monetary policy do we need to carry out, right? Do we need to establish our own credit rating system in this country so that if Dennett has a credit score, Gabriel has a credit score, we know that if he goes to the bank can go into that system and say, okay, this is how many,
Mm.
this is what Dennett's credit score is. This is how, even if you don't make it available to the public, let it be just within the banking industries where they're able to make credit decision based off of that. Talking about things like that and putting that proposal on the table to be able to fund them and bring them to fruition so that way banks are not just scared to lend anymore. So they are not withholding money that they should be lending. In Liberia, you go to banks, they are sitting on money and they think for them they think that is the safest way to grow. They're sitting on money that they're not lending, right? In actuality, that's from a balance from a accounting standpoint, that's a risk. You know, every time you take a deposit and you bring it onto your balance sheet, you keep that money on your balance sheet. That is a risk. That is a liability on the bank balance sheet. When you loan it out, that's an asset. So you should be lending out that money that you're taking in. And in order to do that, you got to be taking risk on people. Hey, Daniel wants to grow FOL to become maybe the biggest platform in the country. He has built it to this level. We know Dennis' character. We know the kind of people he has around him. How can we lend to Dennis? Even if we don't lend to him a lot, let's give him, let's say 20,000. Let's see how he grows it, right? If he can turn it around and then pay that back within, let's say, the next 5 years, then it will come back say, okay, I've established one in Monserrado. I have one in Nimba. I want to build another one in the southeast that's going to cover the southeast. Let me go back to this bank. I've lent. They give me 20,000 before. I pay it back in 5 years. This time I want to go back and borrow 30,000 or 40,000. Easier, easy step in process, in gradation, incremental improvement. That's how you take risk on people. But
Mm.
we are not doing that across the country. These are the conversations the central bank governor, the minister of finance, the Liberian Revenue Authority, and the president economic advisory team should be sitting on and be having discussion
Mm.
about every month or every quarter to
And
be
then
able
they
to grow
bring
the
in
economy.
the National Investment Commission. Be-
Exactly.
because, Gabriel, when you were talking, like, and I said it that the finance minister is like a glorified disbursement officer. The paymaster we used to have before, a long time, going
Hmm.
around the country paying people because and anytime they talk, it's like, okay, who is giving us money?
Yeah.
So even with LRA and the money, they normally they boast, oh, we have exceeded the projection. But where really is the money coming from? It's almost like those of us in the USA, right? The Liberian Diaspora Organization. Every time the money we raise is like we just take money from people. Gabriel and I, we are part of the that Botican, how your village called?
Boniken.
Boniken. We're part of the
Yeah.
Boniken Association. All we do is we are not doing anything extra to get money from. It's like, okay, Gabriel bring 200. So the money is just coming from, so it's just, so we're not really raising money
Mhm,
because Gabriel gave 200, I gave 200, the other person gave 200.
mhm.
So even the money LRA is raising is just right there. They're not
It's
going
right there.
outside
Right.
to get more money and
Right.
doing things like what Ghana is doing to bring it is, oh, okay, let a person, you get business here, give us $300 every month. It's not enough. That's what I want
Eh,
to say.
Yeah. So let me expand on that. And sometime I think I had a discussion before with William and I when we first started. Right. So you brought up a group points, meaning that the revenue that LRA raises is just money that is right within the country that circulates. So they like meaning where does it come from? How do we grow? Right. So this is going to be a long-winded. If you look at the West here in the US, the government is one of the biggest lender, right? Because they know that in order to grow the GDP, you have to expand. So every time, every year, the data come out, you say, oh, this country grew by 4.5%. The question you should be asking, what does that even mean? Like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean that it grew, right? I mean,
Mm.
the money supply grew. That means the economic activity grew, right? But what does that mean from the layman's standpoint? So let me break this down. The government is the biggest lender, the SBA. In addition, they create partnership with the banks to guarantee loans. In addition to them lending directly, they have partnership with the banks because they want to ensure that, right? We can do the same thing. We can do the same thing in Liberia, right? I gave this example, but I will break it down from a different perspective. Let's say you are one of the biggest consulting in Liberia, right? And you are so good at what you do that you broker somebody's biggest deal in the country in Liberia. That anybody, any big firm that comes in Liberia, they want to do consulting with the government, they come to you to structure it, right? You have people that come from different part of the world to come to you in your central office in Liberia. You have 5 staff, right? Great individual. You have 3 managers, 2 assistants in our office. All Dennis does is he brings in consulting, he brings in partnership, and these people close this deal. Perfect. So Dennis, as a very savvy consultant, he said, you know what? Central Moravia is a very crowded place. It's hard for one to have international partner for them to come from the airport and come here because of the traffic. It's inconvenient. So I'm going to open another office on the highway, 10 minutes or 15 minutes away from the highway. So when my international partners come to broker deals, they don't have to drive all the way to Central Moravia and deal with the traffic. They can come
Yeah.
15 minutes from the airport directly to that office. We still we will still have people there to get that deal done. Perfect. That idea, you take the idea and say, you go to the bank, you say, I want to take out $1 million loan, 500 to build our office, and another 500 for working capital for to cover payroll, in case there's delay in payment from my clients. They say, okay, Dennis, we know you're one of the biggest consulting in this country. We're gonna give you the money, the 1 million at 12%. You say, that's too high. They say, okay, we'll give it to you at 10%. Now, once that deal, they say we're going to take your office that you have in Central Moravia as the collateral, right? And you personally then is going to guarantee that loan. You said, no problem. I have big clients. I'm one of the biggest consulting in this country. No problem. The moment you sign that $1 million, right? There are several things that just happen. And this is where we talk about expansion, right? There are several things that just happen. I will give you two sides of that equation. One side of the equation is that you have just created security in the economy that wasn't there, meaning money that wasn't that money that expansion you talk about, you're just expanding that economy by $1 million, right? That economy grew by $1 million. Now multiply that over thousands of other consultants in the country across different countries. I mean across different sectors, real estate, and all of that. Then you get the bigger picture here. But let me break it down. You signed that $1 million. The bank lend it to you at 10%, but guess how much they borrow that money for, right? Let's say they borrow it. They borrow for 5%, they lend it to you for 5. How much are they making? 5%. That means every time you make your payment, they're making 5%, right?
Yeah.
That means the bank itself is spending by another 5%, right? Guess what you're going to do? When you build that office in on the highway,
Right.
you are going to create jobs. You are not going to be in the office, both offices at the same time. So you say, let me hire three managers and 2 other assistants. You are just created 5 jobs within that country that was not ever available in that country, right? Let me take it a little bit further. Those 5 people you've hired, they're now going to start paying taxes to the government, income taxes. They're going to be buying They're going to be paying transportation to get to work. They're going to be buying food now because you're paying them. So the multiply effect on that side, that's
Yeah.
an expansion. That means there is more money coming to the government just because the bank decided to take risk on Dennis because they know Dennis, right? They're comfortable with Dennis and they're able to lend him that 1 million, right? In addition, because you are now bringing in more money to your consulting businesses because you have two offices, more taxes to the government. In addition to that, the house, I mean, the building that you just built, they're going to assess it. You're going to pay property taxes on it. So you look at that, you say, this is how, when you say every year when they tell you that the country expands, this is the expansion. This is how it happened, right? You have to take risk. I know people are risky, they don't pay, but you have to be able to take risk on people to expand your economy. So the IMF come out every year to tell you, oh, your economy is going to grow 5%. Well, that is true. But if you don't do that, you don't grow the economy, you don't invest in people, you don't take risk on people, you don't invest in infrastructure, you are not going to achieve that 5%. So that's
Mm.
how the expansion happened. Right.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is FOL Marketplace. That's the place we discuss business, finance, economics, and everything in between. The expert here, our banking, finance, and economic expert is Mr. Gabriel Tabito Caro, the man doing big job here with a bank. So I don't want to even talk about that, but he knows his stuff. If you want to be part of the conversation, please call the number on the screen, 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403 pound. If you are in Liberia, we'll call on George to give you your numbers to call
Okay,
and be a part.
okay, folks. So wherever you are on a Saturday afternoon like this, and you're listening to the program Focus on Liberia on Care Radio 95.9, the numbers to call 0881-871-670 and 0777 959 959 0777 959 959 and 0881 876 871 670. These are the numbers to call and be a part on the show this afternoon.
Thank you. And Gabriel, talking more about Liberia, because we're talking about the credit rating and all that,
Yep.
how can Liberia prepare itself to leverage the capital market? And if you and given the alleged inflation of prices for $1 billion concentrate, we'll come to the concentrator, but let's talk about how can Liberia leverage it, prepare itself to leverage the capital market.
Yeah, and I will, before I expand on that, I will give Larry the credit because he's one of the biggest proponent of this. Uh, you know, have Liberia having a credit score. Um, it's I think I said this earlier. It's very easy. When I mean easy, there's a playbook out there. There's a playbook on all of the three rating agencies side. They have a template. So if you want to get a credit rating as a country, you go download that template and you follow exactly what the template said, right? Is that I do I agree to that? No, but you can also argue come terms of them when they send their representative in your country to assess it. You can also add other things on there to make your case. But there's a template. You go, you download that template. The country can do that, and you say, okay, you complete that. They look at governance, right? The rule of law, the the history of the country in terms of how it's been able to pay debt, right? They look at the revenues, how it has grown over the years. Um, and based on those criteria, they give you a credit rating score, right? You may not like it, or you most likely start at the bottom and you can argue your case, right? And for the AU, you can do what the AU is trying to do, argue to say, we have natural resources, we have all those things, you can add that on there too to give us a better score. But that's the playbook you can take. You take that playbook, you go to this rating agency, they give you a score, they'll deliberate beyond that and give you a score. Now, once you're giving a score, let's say for us, we will start at the triple C, which is technically a junk status. We will even take that junk status as a country, right, and go on the capital market, right? What that junk status means that for anybody who wants to lend to Liberia that we're going to raise money for, the interest we're going to be paying is going to be high. We call it the yield, right? It's going to be very high because our history based on the credit score does not give us enough leverage, right? We can take that, even though it is a junk status, we can take that and be able to raise additional capital to carry out some invest. Like we need right now a connected road network across the country. We can
Mm.
price that and go on the market and take that credit score and go on the market and fund that project, right? Interconnected highways across the country, everywhere, right? And do that, right? What we can also do too, we can any project we want to finance, right? We can go on the capital market instead of just running to the IMF, where you know they only most likely the most they've given us so far was a 63 million. They don't give us much, right? So if we are able to get our own credit score, we are able to go on the capital market, or and raise money in addition to what we're getting from the IMF and the World Bank as well, right? And eventually, we might be able to raise enough money to 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 pay off all these the IMF and the World Banks as well, and do invest in bigger projects that give us better return that we might be able to pay off the IMF and World Bank. Yeah.
Hmm. Let's go to the giant concentrator.
Mhm.
Right. Asalamita, even though some people question it, just invested $1 billion or more establishing the concentrator in Liberia.
Mhm.
Right. First of all, let me hear your perspective on that investment. What does that mean?
So, um, for me, there's two. I have a two. Well, kind of mixed feelings about it, right? For me, I think any investment in Liberia that create jobs, I don't want to say it's a good investment, but it's good because people will get jobs in Liberia. But then you also want to look at the the duration of the project, the impact of the project, what it means for the country in its entirety, as opposed to, okay, it's just going to create jobs. If we never had it before, it's going to do such A, B, C, and D, right? So for me, I thought, okay, from somebody who works in banking, when I look at stuff like that from a project finances, okay, who is doing this investment? Initially, the price tag put on it is 1.4 billion, right? $1.5 billion, right? Meaning, if you are going to make that kind of investment in a country, you should definitely know that you have what we call your return on investment, right? That means your return on investment is very high. Meaning, if you're going to mine iron ore, that means the iron ore you're going to be getting from there are going to be over the terms of that contract, whether it's 10 years, 15 or 20 years, are going to be very high to the point that you believe is worth that 1.5 billion, right? So that's the first thing, meaning how much. So the next question from your standpoint, from a country standpoint, or somebody in the Minister of Finance, or like I said, the president or his advisor should be thinking about how much is this company going to be getting over the 25 years or 50 years for this project, right? So that will guide your thought process. The second thing is that, right, the jobs that they're going to create, you know, what are the quality of the jobs,
Yeah.
right? Are Liberians going to be working at the lower scale, or are they going to be managing some of these greater projects or within that project as well, right? So you want to look at that as well. But I think the reason why I brought this up, because I want us to change the way we look at these kind of projects, right? We shouldn't just look at it as as somebody who desperately needs something, but from a
Yeah.
long point standpoint, what does that mean for the country? How much economic activity is this going to bring to that region? Now, you also have to look at the environmental side. Iron ore will not, we don't have infinite supply of iron ore in that place.
Yeah.
Eventually, that factory is going to pack up and leave. There are going to be holes and environmental impact in that place. How do you repurpose that place so the environmental degradation doesn't remain there forever, right? The third thing is that for those people that used to work for that that are going to be working for that company in that place, how do you how do you how do you how do you retrain them, right? You have to be able to retrain these people, right? So you have to think about all of those things and be able to make a decision as a country, not just, okay, we'll have a $1.4 billion investment here in this region. They're going to hire people. This, yes, which is great, right? But you have to look at the long-term standpoint. How much are you getting for that investment? How much, not, iron ore. are they getting from that place? How much will you be getting? Is there a public-private partnership? Is that a equity split where they invest in 1.4 billion, right? They're going to be taking in maybe 3 or 5 billion annually. Are you going to be getting half of that or even 40% of that? Those are the way we need to be looking at these things as opposed to. But I think when you're in a place of desperation, somebody hand you peanuts, you can celebrate. Somebody hand you something from the ground, you celebrate because you never even assess it. You don't even know where it
Yeah.
came from. You're just excited that it's coming to you, and that's what I think we've looked at for a long time.
Thank you, Gabriel, for even bringing that up, because things are so political in the country. So all we look at is under my administration, this is what happened.
Yes, right.
So there is no thought of continuity. Like take Abuja for instance. When the people were building Abuja, it started with, I think it was Bamagida, I may be wrong, and it went through. No, not Bamagida. I think it was probably Yakubu Gowon. I mean, it started gradually, and every new president who came built up upon that. In Liberia now, it's like we measure. Okay, it was this person who built. In fact, they don't even say administration. They say, "Oh, Taba built a multilateral. Though they build the road, we are build this one. This build this one." And so, when a president comes to power, all you want to do is to complete whatever you can within a 6-year period. If you don't do that, the next president coming is not going to give you credit. Is not going to build. In fact, they're going to start from scratch. So, in the rush to celebrate these small gains, even trash looks like gold if it is under your presidency. If it's
Yeah.
under the other guy, it's bad. If it's under you, it's good. And our supporters continue to celebrate those things, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And for me, I think it's now. I don't want to take away. We should celebrate them, but we should also celebrate what we are getting. Meaning that we should celebrate the fact if in fact we are getting that, the fact that we're getting
Gabriel, before you
a good
continue,
outcome.
every time we speak of this investment,
Yeah.
two of them are watched now. There was this, like I think I don't want to minimize it, but I'll just say an Indian guy. He started a company everywhere carrying. I mean, somebody went to your country. I mean, I established Focus on Labrador, and we've been paying people. Nobody talks about that because it's not this huge. But just there's these little things. An Indian guy, just for his own, started his company, and then the people. So every government official that goes there, what they say is, "Hey, if people didn't trust the stability of our government, they were not going to come." So in other words, there's a plus for the guy in power, and it's over and over and over. And this is annoying me.
Yeah. It should be annoying all of us too, but again, I think I was talking to somebody about this, Dennis. You're not just seeing it, you are seeing it from people, not just from people in government who you think, okay, they want to score political point, but you are seeing it
Yeah.
from people who are not in politics as well, right?
Yes.
Who, and again, it's because we haven't seen this thing in a large scale. So, like you said, when you see peanuts, you celebrate it, right? But yes, it should be celebrated, but also we should be celebrating the the, what we are getting from a long-term standpoint. And if it's in addition to that, if it's not a good investment, we should also call it out. We should also,
Yeah.
well, okay to question it, to say what are we getting from it, right? But we don't do that. People, you question some of these things, people go attack you, and they come after you, they call you all kinds of names just by questioning it. But I know everything is politicized in Liberia, so we don't look at the nitty gritty details of these kind of investments. So we just celebrate everything. And those of us who question the details of it, there's a few, you know, there's few of us, but that's how you should be looking at these things. All right, we don't have any calls.
We have callers here. Let me bring on the first caller here, and that's Percy Harris. Percy, you're live.
Hey Dennis, how you doing? Gabby, how you coming?
We're doing
Hey,
excellent.
Percy, how are you? Long
Good.
time.
I'm enjoying the show. I'm watching the show from where I'm enjoying the train of thought about Gabriel has a mastery of the issue. But I just want to highlight the point. We have a problem in Liberia. We think about, I think Gabriel talked to these things the other thing. We have a liquidity problem in Liberia also with the banks, as far as the banks are concerned. When banks make loans in Liberia, typically in the United States, when banks make loans, those loans are not sitting on the bank's balance sheet, right? They take it and sell it to investors. Investors will be able to wait for the interest payment. So the bank is basically just a fund. They get their fee, they get a commission, whatever it is, and pass it on to the investor who will be waiting long term for their payment. We don't have that in Liberia. That's why we don't have that in Liberia. So when we make loans in Liberia, the banks typically have to hold that loan until maturity. You know what I'm saying? And what Gabriel was talking about, that's the risky part, because those are like, you're not turning your money around. The channel where raising now. So no, the bank cannot take the bank cannot continue making loan continuously. Like, unlike in the States here, when we make loan, the bank send that off, they get the cash, make more loans and whatnot. We have that problem in Liberia, and that's why kind of the interest rates sometimes are kind of really outrageous in Liberia also.
And why?
And so
why do we have that?
The outrageous interest rate, part is due to inflation, but part is what I explained to you also, right? So it's not cheap. So if you want to build a house here, you go to the bank, they give you a mortgage, they give you for 5%, given the environment that we're in, 4% interest rate on your mortgage and whatnot. If you did that same thing in Liberia, the reason for the low interest rate is part of monetary policy, but also part of the prevailing economic condition in the country, right? So when you do that in Liberia, the bank have to hold that. Right, and the more money stay out there, the more risks you take.
Why are there no investors to sell that to? That's my question.
Well, part of it is policy, right? Part of it is policy, government policy on investment and whatnot, right?
Okay.
So, part of it is the prevailing economic security condition in the country, all that good stuff, the rule of law, all those things. Those things are what drive investment at the end of the day,
Thank
right?
you.
Contract enforcement in our courts and whatnot. So those are things that the government needs to take care of to make the enabling environment attractive to investment, right? So that's why we're kind of behind the 8 ball on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thank you. Let me bring in next caller before you come in. And that's Attorney Cornelius Freeman. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great conversation. I think the issue about having a credit rating agency for like African country is a good idea generally. I think the only problem is a lot of times things that work so well in other places, when it's brought to Africa, somehow it doesn't work so well. But generally speaking, credit rating agency, I think in the Western world, sometimes they are biased towards Africa because sometimes they don't know a lot about Africa, and that lack of knowledge leads them to give African countries average ratings. But whether you have a credit rating from Africa or Europe or Asia, the bottom line is that economic is an issue of practicality. You get good credit rating only if you credit and you pay your debt. If you're in Africa, the rule applies similarly. If you're in Asia, it's the same thing. You're not going to get a good credit rating if you credit money and you don't pay back your credit. Now, if you follow what happened in a lot of African countries, when the international financial institutions were no longer like giving loans out that freely, they went to China and they took a whole bunch of loans from China and they couldn't pay back. And at the end of the day, some of them had to mortgage their natural resources to China. Some of them had to mortgage their port facilities to China and stuff like that. So it is a good thing, but the fundamental principle in economics still applies, irrespective of whether it's in Africa. If you credit and you don't pay, it's going to be bad news for your credit rating. And if you can see what is going on with the Chinese loans, you realize that the issue about credit in Africa is more than just creating a credit rating agency. There is a lot to do with people paying debts when they take those debts, paying back the debts when they take it. So, that's my take on it. I don't have a question per se. I just wanted to add that to the...
Mr. Freeman, you mean, when you say people take that, you mean consumers or businesses? Because if we have the Africa credit rating, this will not is not for individual consumers, right?
Well, whether it's individual consumer, it is public sector enterprises, or it is countries, right?
Right.
Irrespective of whether it's that way. Let's just start with maybe companies and public sector companies and countries.
Right.
It boils down to the same thing. The people, the countries that take money from China,
they don't pay, right?
They are like public. Yeah, they take the money. Is one of the big issues now in international finance. The fact that people go to China, collect loans, they don't pay. Sometimes they mortgage their natural resources.
Maybe that because of the terms of agreement. Maybe the terms of agreements are not fair.
No, all that thing is why I see people make us Africans to believe that we got 2 senses and the other people got 5. We have 5 senses like the Chinese men. So if the Chinese men bring an international finance contract to you, the fact that you have 5 senses, you use your 5 senses to read through the contract, the same way the Chinese men will use the 5 senses. You can sign a contract and afterward you say, oh, the Chinese men fool me. We love them saying the Europeans fool us. Now the people in Britain will fool us. Now we're going to China, we say the Chinese will fool us. Then who are we? So I'm saying to you, whether Beijing, New York, or Johannesburg, the fundamental principle of credit is that when you credit, you have to pay back. And if you don't pay back, your credit rating is going to be bad. And why the credit rating agency is a good thing for Africa and African companies and countries and public sector enterprises, the recent loans that we took from China is a warning. The recent set of loans that we took from China is a warning because a lot of countries, like for example, Zambia didn't pay the money back and it ran into the problem. And there were other countries in that category. So if you take funds and you don't pay it back, I don't care who you are, where you took that money from, your credit rating is going to be bad.
Thank you.
So that's the point I'm making. That as far as credit is concerned, there's a universal principle. Right. It applies. So it's not like a solution to say, oh, since we are in Africa now and we got our own credit rating agency, we're just going to write nice stories about ourselves and everything will be fine. The fundamental principle still apply that when you credit, you must pay back.
And can you just...
So that's the point.
I like your point.
Yeah,
so before you go, because if you look at it the other way is we don't think on the, in terms of credit rating. So we want a president who is able to beg somebody to give us money. We are not worried about whether we are credit worthy. I believe that when I came here, I didn't know anybody when I got my Hyundai, right? Based on my credit. But in Africa, it looks like we only think that, okay, we need a president who, when the president goes to the IMF, the World Bank, or goes to China, Canada, Europe, wherever, that they will give us free money. The idea of being credit worthy is not on the table.
Yes, and that is not a good thing for Africa because the money that you get by way of charity is not equal to the money that you will get away by accessing the financial markets or the debt markets yourself. Like, for example, you could float bonds on the European market, right? You can raise billions of dollars. If you go to beg people in Europe, they might not give you that money. They might give you 50 million, 10 million, 5 million, and then they will put a lot of condition on the 10 million they give you. But if you have a better credit rating, you can float bonds, maybe all European, exchanges. You can raise billions. So it's important. So I believe it's a good idea. I just don't want people to lose sight of the fundamental principle of debt. That when you credit, you have to pay.
If you don't pay.
So you take the debt from Beijing or you take it from New York or Brussels, you still have to pay. And the recent situation with China is a warning because people rushed to China when China was giving out loans, and China was giving out some of these loans. Sometimes it was not even relevant, but they just took it because you could build a colorful political project, and then people will say, "Oh, you're doing well," but it didn't have real economic value. So a lot of them took those projects, but those projects didn't really contribute to the economy, and they couldn't pay back, and now they have to sacrifice their resources and other things to China. So it's just a warning that it doesn't solve the problem. You have to be fiscally prudent, and you have to manage your resources well. But it's a good thing generally.
Thank you. I enjoying this conversation so much that I don't even want anybody to go. Gabriel, the callers discuss many things, right? One of the things I want to bring to your attention is, normally the situation we in when these concession companies come, starting with Firestone, the reason we got in big trouble, and it was like they had us at the throat because we were in there and say, so this whole Firestone something that at some point they sent experts that were paying directly. They were taking over our ministries, our agency, collecting money for us and paying themselves.
Yep.
When ArcelorMittal came at a time or Judy Bryant was in power, the interim president, it was like, we are so broke, we don't have anything. So take this for free, take this, just be a company here. Even if you bring in anything in the country, you ship it free. Even though when you're sending books to my Peking in Lofa, I gotta pay. So all these things always come at a time, out of desperation. So we just give anything, and then we'll be stuck with the consequences.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with Konyene and Percy as well. All right. So what the point that Konyene was making is true. Usually when we, and which you alluded to as well.
Brother Gabriel, let me just hold you there until the caller running line.
Sure.
Hello, caller. Yes. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Your name and where you calling from?
This is Brown Tate calling from Monrovia.
Welcome to the program, Brian.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I've been following this poll and the discussion. I really wanted to ask a question, and then sometimes I think to myself that we are all problem is that like the credit rating and then the ability for us to access money through banks. And if, for example, that the African man or Liberian man, for example, the make use of our case study will go to the bank to get credit and do stipulation how to pay, and sometimes refuse to pay. And the authority that's supposed to hold that individual or institution accountable will relinquish or will lay on it, and then the money will stay there. And other people expect it when they want to credit. So you don't think that we ourselves, we are the partner, and we are infected and hold people accountable through banking and credit and things. I think the larger market will look at those things and see that we have the authority or the ability to issue money on the international market. We can pay back. You get me?
Yes, my brother.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. Your name, where you calling from? Yes, we can hear you, my brother. I'm sorry, my brother.
And Amarillo, I say welcome to the Gold Star of Africa. This is Liberia. This is the home of liberty. I say you are welcome.
Sorry, my brother. Run. Brother Dennis, you can come in.
Yeah, thank you. Gabriel.
We have another program on here 4 p.m.
Okay, we should be wrapping up shortly. Yeah, and
let's wrap up.
Yeah, as I was saying, I agree with Percy. When we don't have a capital, one of the things is we don't have a capital market in Liberia. Meaning, if we make loan to be able to sell them on the secondary market to take that money and do something and reinvest it in the banks as well. So, and this is why most banks in Liberia actually resort to the short-term lending, like the what we call a line of credit or letter of credit, right? Where I have 7 containers coming in, When give me the money. When I sell the stuff in the container, I'll give you back the money. So it's a quick turnaround, quick turnaround. So
Sepe.
absolutely right. Step it exactly.
Mm.
Um, and if we do give out loan, they're not for they don't like we do have 30 years mortgages here or so. They don't last that long, right? With the point that Konya was making is that for me, as I said, in as much that I think with the establishment of the AU credit agency is going to be an uphill climb. It is something that I think we do need. Even though I think there's going to be initially there's going to be a credibility challenge in terms of whether we are able to rate ourselves. But yes, I also do agree there is the the stigma that most African countries they take out these loans and they don't pay. They end up defaulting. Ghana has defaulted I think 17 times since they started going to the IMF. Zambia has defaulted as well. So when you default for a country like that, it takes a long time to be able to go back and go borrow again. So there is that stigma as well. But I think being to a place where we do have economic sovereignty, not just freedom, um, is something that we desperately need across the continent. We're in the 60s and the time we were gaining independence, that's the time we were looking for we were looking for freedom, but now the second phase of this fight is I think is economic sovereignty, which I think by establishing the AU credit rating agency and competing with the global financial architecture as it is set up, we are able to do that independently with ourselves as well and chart our own path. Yep.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and I have learned a lot, and
Yep.
that's why I'm enjoying this thing.
Yep.
Your final thoughts, and then we call it a day.
Yeah, and again, thank you for having me. Thank you for those of you, your comment, Konyana and Percy and everyone else I call from Liberia. And as I said, this is initially when we started this conversation, as I said, this is these are conversations like these we need to be having in our living rooms, in front of our table, in front of when we're eating our core across Liberia, not just what is happening politically in Liberia, but also what is happening that is impacting everything that we do in Liberia as well. The First, I would take this piece. The establishment of the rating agency is something that I believe will happen because the African countries are very adamant about this. They want to get this done, or else they will continue to be playing in this field where they are not, you know, fairly refereed. So I think this is why I think it'll happen as well. But plus, I think this is something that is desperately needed across the continent. It has opened a lot of opportunity for many African countries, such as Liberia, that don't have any teeth in terms of uh, financial, resources. It'll give us an avenue to which we can raise money on the capital market as well. Um, the second part here also when you look at what is happening across the Sahel or Ghana or Botswana right now as well in terms of really taking things into your own hand and centralizing certain natural resources to really give yourself that advantage. It's something that I hope, even though it is not a strategy, I hope Liberia can come around to do. Maybe a leader will come around to do that because it will bring a lot of natural resources back in the hands of Liberia. Even if that means first looking at those concession agreement that we signed, every single one of them, and renegotiating new terms. If not, you maybe create a kind of a equity split within those investments and make sure you get a bigger share of the investment that comes out of there as opposed to we're going to build roads here, we're going to build this community school here, we're going to give you free access to import stuff here, which these companies come and take advantage of. We shouldn't compete from a place of desperation, but from a place of position where we know that we have the upper advantage, that we have the natural resources in the ground. So um, I think these are conversations we need to be taking part of. And I think most of the time when we come on this platform, we talk politics, which is good, but as you said earlier, politics, everything of our politics is informed by our economic position, right? The arguments, the political party, whether this is happening or not, at the end of the day, we want to be in a position where we're economically sustainable personally and have economic sovereignty as a country. This is what all Liberians look for, whether they tell you or not, whether they are playing belly politics or not. At the end of the day, they want economic sovereignty because it gives us the advantage to build a country that is sustainable for all of us. And I think this is why these conversations are important. Yeah.
On that note, say thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, George, and the Kia FM family. Thanks to our viewers, even those who will watch later. We close with our song that says, "We are all Liberians." Have a good day and God bless. Enjoy your weekend.
We are Liberians.